My name is Megan. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. I spend my days meticulously tracking down massive financial fraud, uncovering deeply hidden corporate assets, and systematically dismantling the most complex white-collar lies. I am naturally analytical cold when I need to be, and absolutely relentless when someone tries to scam me. But somehow, I spent my entire life being the scapegoat of my own family, expected to bankroll my golden child sister Brittany and her husband Jamal. Before I continue this story and tell you exactly how I dismantled their lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only loved you for what you could give them. Growing up, I learned early on that love was entirely transactional. My parents, Richard and Susan, made it clear that my achievements were expected, while my sister Brittany's mere existence was celebrated. I eventually built a lucrative career and bought a beautiful home to raise my daughter Lily. Meanwhile, Brittany married Jamal, a man who runs a failing luxury car dealership. Together, they live wildly beyond their means, fully funded by my parents' endless bailouts. The breaking point happened last weekend. Lily was turning 10. She had spent weeks making hand-drawn invitations for her grandparents, her aunt, her uncle, and her cousin Sydney. I rented a beautiful local garden and set up a table meant for our family. Lily wore her favorite dress, sitting eagerly at the head of the empty table. We waited for an hour, then 2 hours. I texted my mother, my father, and Brittany. My messages delivered but went ignored. I watched my daughter's smile slowly fade as she realized no one was coming. I held her as she cried into my shoulder. At that moment, something inside me permanently snapped. I stopped being the hopeful daughter seeking approval and became the forensic accountant who deals purely in facts and consequences. 3 days of absolute silence followed. Then on Wednesday afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. I opened it to find an outrageously extravagant invitation for my niece, Sydney's 15th birthday party. A printed card fell out signed by my mother. It stated that because Jamal and Brittany were planning a spectacular event downtown, the family was requiring a mandatory contribution of $5,000 per person. I stared blankly at the thick paper. They abandoned my daughter on her birthday and now had the audacity to demand $10,000 from me. I walked into my home office, wrote a check for $1 and mailed it back with a single word: congratulations. I knew my mother would lose her mind. Susan lives for appearances, and an insult to her golden grandchild is an unforgivable crime in her eyes. I took immediate precautions. I immediately called an emergency locksmith to change every single deadbolt on my house. I blocked Richard, Susan, Brittany, Jamal, and Sydney. I felt a profound sense of peace. I thought they would finally leave me alone, but I severely underestimated their entitlement. Friday evening, heavy knocking rattled my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw a police cruiser parked in my driveway. Two stern, broad-shouldered officers stood on my front porch, illuminated by the porch light. I took a deep breath and opened the heavy wooden door. The taller officer asked if I was Megan. I confirmed. He then informed me that they had received a formal report from my mother, Susan. According to the police, my mother claimed that I had visited her house earlier that week and stolen a diamond family heirloom necklace valued at $20,000. The officers placed their hands on their belts, looked at me with cold suspicion, and demanded to come inside and search my home immediately. I stood my ground firmly in the front doorway. I calmly asked the taller officer if they had a search warrant signed by a judge. The officer frowned, shifting his weight, admitting they did not have a warrant yet, but strongly advised my cooperation. I told them no one was stepping foot inside my house, where my 10-year-old daughter was resting. Before the officer could respond, a silver Mercedes sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. My mother, Susan, threw her car door open and scrambled up my front lawn. She was crying hysterically, clutching her chest as if having a heart attack. She pointed a shaking finger at me, wailing loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. She told the officers I was a spiteful daughter who stole her $20,000 diamond necklace to ruin my niece Sydney's birthday party. She screamed that I had always been vindictive, hoarding my college scholarships at 18 just to make my sister look bad, and that this theft was my ultimate revenge. She begged them to arrest me right then. The officers turned to me expecting a massive reaction. They expected me to yell back, cry, or defensively deny the absurd accusations. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my iPad. Working as a forensic accountant means I deal with professional liars every single day. I know people will swear on their lives that they are entirely innocent right up until you show them the irrefutable paper trail, or in this specific case, the digital video file. I unlocked my tablet and tapped on my home security application. I did not tell my parents when I upgraded my home security system last month. I discreetly installed ultra-high-definition 4K cameras around my property, including a specialized dome camera hidden in the ceiling of my front porch. I calmly swiped back to a recording from exactly 2 weeks ago, the last time my mother invited herself over to snoop through my belongings under the guise of dropping off old mail. I turned the screen toward the officers and pressed play. The high-resolution video was crystal clear. It showed Susan walking out of my front door. She paused on the porch, looked left and right to make sure no neighbors were watching, and reached deeply into her designer handbag. She pulled out the velvet jewelry box containing the diamond necklace. The audio was so sharp you could hear the distinct snap of the box opening. Susan took the necklace out, fastened it securely around her neck, tucked it under her silk scarf, tossed the empty box into my bushes, and walked to her car with a smirk on her face. The silence on my front porch was deafening. The taller officer leaned in, squinted at the screen, and politely asked me to replay the footage. I tapped the screen and let it run again. The video left absolutely zero room for interpretation or lingering doubt. The diamond necklace was never stolen. Susan had taken it herself, worn it out of my house, and was now trying to frame me for grand larceny because I refused to pay her ridiculous extortion fee. The officers slowly turned away from the screen and glared fiercely at my mother. Susan's fake tears instantly stopped. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She stammered nervously, frantically claiming that the video must be artificially altered, that I was a computer hacker, and that she was a respected member of the local community. The taller officer raised his heavy hand, cutting her off completely. He stepped down from the porch and approached her. His voice was stern and unyielding. He informed Susan that filing a false police report is a serious criminal offense. He told her that wasting police resources to settle a petty family dispute over a birthday party could easily result in heavy fines and potential jail time. He pointed a stern finger directly at her face and warned her that if they received one more frivolous call from her address, she would be the one leaving in cold steel handcuffs. Susan turned pale, her face completely drained of color. She scurried back to her Mercedes, refusing to make eye contact with me, and sped away down the street. The officers apologized to me for the disturbance, tipped their hats, and returned to their cruiser. I watched their red taillights slowly fade into the quiet night. I felt a brief moment of sweet triumph. But just as I reached for the brass doorknob to go back inside my safe home, bright headlights suddenly blinded me. A massive black Cadillac Escalade aggressively swerved right into my driveway, stopping mere inches from my garage door. The heavy driver's side door of the black Escalade swung open with a loud creak, and Jamal stepped out into the chilly night air. He slammed the door shut with unnecessary force, the sound echoing through my quiet suburban neighborhood. Jamal is a massive guy standing well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that he constantly uses to intimidate people. He marched up my driveway, his heavy boots stomping loudly against the concrete until he stood right at the base of my porch stairs. He glared up at me, crossing his thick arms over his chest, trying to cast a menacing shadow over my front door. I did not back away. I kept my hand firmly on the doorframe, my posture completely relaxed. In my profession, I interview corporate embezzlers who try to use aggressive body language to hide their panic. Jamal was projecting the exact same kind of desperate anger. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face. He told me I had just crossed a permanent line by humiliating my mother in front of the local police. He claimed that Susan was currently at home having a severe panic attack because of my cruel lack of empathy. Then he took a step up the stairs, closing the distance between us. His voice dropped to a low, threatening growl as he demanded $10,000. He stated that the price for fixing the family reputation had just doubled. According to him, $5,000 was for Sydney's luxury birthday gala, and the other $5,000 was an inconvenience fee for the emotional trauma I had inflicted on his mother-in-law. He demanded I transfer the funds into his business account by morning, or he would make sure the entire family made my life a living nightmare. I stared at him for a long moment, letting his ridiculous demand hang in the cold air. Then I let out a short, sharp laugh. I looked down at his wrist where a massive, shiny gold watch peeked out from under his jacket sleeve. I asked him if he honestly thought I was stupid. I told him he was wearing a counterfeit Rolex Daytona. I pointed out that the second hand on his watch was ticking loudly in distinct increments, while a real Rolex uses a smooth, sweeping motion. Furthermore, the gold plating on the clasp was already rubbing off, revealing the cheap base metal underneath. Jamal immediately dropped his arms, pulling his jacket sleeve down to cover the fake watch. His arrogant expression cracked, replaced by a flash of genuine embarrassment. I did not let him recover. I reminded him of a Tuesday afternoon exactly 6 years ago. I reminded him how he sat in my living room crying actual tears, begging me for a $50,000 loan because his luxury car dealership was on the verge of bankruptcy. I reminded him that I had reviewed his amateur business plan back then and politely declined because I knew he was terrible at managing inventory. I looked him dead in the eye and stated that a man who has to beg his younger sister-in-law for a bailout and who wears fake jewelry to project false wealth is in no position to demand $10,000 from anyone. His face flushed with deep dark rage. He took another step forward, his jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grinding. I calmly lifted my phone, showing him that the camera was still actively recording every single move he made. Jamal stopped in his tracks. He knew he could not physically intimidate me without facing immediate legal consequences. He let out a harsh breath, turned his head, and spat a thick wad of saliva right onto the pristine concrete of my driveway. He glared at me with pure hatred. He promised me that I would deeply regret disrespecting him. He said he knew exactly where my accounting firm was located and that a few well-placed phone calls about my erratic behavior would guarantee I lost my corporate job. He turned around, marched to his SUV, and peeled out of my driveway, leaving black tire marks. I locked my front door, secured the heavy brass deadbolt, and walked straight into my home office. Jamal had just made a truly massive mistake. He had brought my professional career into this family dispute. If he wanted to weaponize my livelihood, I was going to dismantle his. I sat down at my desk, booted up my high-security workstation, and logged into the Federal Corporate Registry. I typed in the exact name of his auto showroom. Within seconds, I had his official business tax identification number. I cracked my knuckles, opened my forensic auditing software, and began pulling his public financial records. The glow of my dual monitors lit up the dark home office. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, fueled by cold anger and a singular focus. When you know exactly where to look, public financial records tell an intricate story that desperate people try desperately to hide. I started with the State Business Registry to pull the annual reports for Jamal's luxury auto showroom. He always bragged loudly at Thanksgiving dinners about moving high-end European imports, expanding his footprint, and rubbing shoulders with wealthy local athletes. The actual numbers painted a completely different reality. I routed his company's tax identification number through a secure commercial credit database I use for complex corporate investigations. The initial dashboard flashed a rapid series of severe warning indicators. His business credit score was completely tanked. I downloaded the itemized balance sheets and profit and loss statements for the last 3 fiscal years. I started cross-referencing his reported assets against public state tax liens. It did not take a genius to see the financial bleed, but it took a trained forensic accountant to see the sheer scale of the hemorrhage. For 36 straight months, Jamal had been operating deeply in the red. His inventory turnover rate was absolutely abysmal. The luxury cars sitting on his lot were depreciating metal boxes collecting dust. I traced his cash flow statements and saw that he was taking out short-term predatory high-interest loans just to pay the basic utility bills and keep the shiny showroom lights turned on. There were outstanding legal judgments from commercial cleaning services, unpaid local property taxes on his dealership lot, and multiple delayed payment flags from regional auto transport companies. He was now entirely broke. But what genuinely confused me was the sheer volume of his outstanding active debt. A traditional banking institution would have cut off his credit line at least 2 years ago when the losses first compounded. Yet exactly 6 months ago, a major regional bank had inexplicably approved a massive commercial loan restructuring program for his failing enterprise. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring intensely at the glowing spreadsheets. Commercial banks are not charitable organizations. They do not hand over massive sums of money to a business with a heavily documented track record of failure unless that specific loan is backed by ironclad, easily liquidable collateral. I knew Jamal did not own the commercial real estate where his dealership was located. He merely leased it on a month-to-month basis. He did not own the luxury cars outright. They were heavily financed through restrictive floor plan lending agreements. He had absolutely zero liquid assets to his own name. So what on earth did he pledge to the bank to secure that level of capital? I switched browser tabs and logged directly into the county clerk's online property database. I ran a targeted search for all liens and encumbrances tied to Jamal's legal name and his corporate entity. I scrolled past the minor tax disputes and clicked on the main commercial loan filing from 6 months ago. The heavy PDF document loaded slowly on my screen, revealing the required schedule of assets. I scanned down to the specific section listing the pledged collateral. My blood ran completely cold in my veins. Right there in crisp black and white legal text was the physical street address of my parents' home. The beautiful sprawling brick house I grew up in, the house they had proudly paid off over a decade ago, had been leveraged to the absolute hilt. Richard and Susan had secretly signed over the deed to their primary residence to serve as the ultimate guarantor for Jamal's failing commercial loan. They had foolishly bet their entire life savings and their secure retirement on his fraudulent business skills. I clicked on the latest status report electronically attached to the property deed. The situation was infinitely worse than a simple risky loan guarantee. Jamal had completely missed the last 4 consecutive monthly payments. Because the loan was now officially in severe default, the bank had already filed a formal notice of default with the county court. The legal grace period had expired just 2 weeks ago. The crushing reality suddenly clicked into perfect place. The aggressive demand for $5,000 per person for a 15-year-old's birthday party was never about a luxury gala. My mother was not throwing a lavish birthday event for Sydney. They were desperately trying to crowdsource enough fast cash from unsuspecting relatives to catch up on the heavily overdue loan payments. Richard and Susan were secretly facing imminent catastrophic foreclosure, and they were entirely willing to extort their own daughter and ruin my career just to save the house they foolishly risked to protect their golden child's husband. My parents had gambled their entire financial security on a man who wore fake watches and ran a failing business. I closed my laptop, the harsh glow fading into the darkness of my office. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals do not behave rationally. I went to bed that night knowing the extortion attempt was only the beginning. I braced myself for their next move, but I vastly underestimated how low my sister was willing to stoop. The following morning, my phone started vibrating relentlessly on my nightstand at exactly 6 o'clock. I had 27 missed calls and over 50 text messages from extended relatives, old high school acquaintances, and even a few parents from my daughter Lily's school. I opened a text message from a former college roommate. It contained a single hyperlink and a question asking if I had seen what my family was posting about me. I tapped the link and my screen immediately opened the TikTok application. There was my sister Brittany sitting in the dimly lit living room of our parents' house. She was wearing no makeup, her hair intentionally messy, holding a crumpled tissue. She looked directly into the camera, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. She launched into a highly rehearsed sob story. She claimed that our elderly parents were facing sudden severe medical debt. She told her growing audience that I, her wealthy calculating accountant sister, had ruthlessly seized control of their bank accounts. She used heavy, damaging buzzwords like elder financial abuse, malicious manipulation, and intentional psychological torment. She claimed I locked my parents out of their savings and refused them $5,000 needed for emergency treatments. She never mentioned Jamal. She never mentioned the luxury car dealership. She never mentioned the impending foreclosure or Sydney's ridiculous 15th birthday gala. She simply painted me as a cold-blooded monster torturing our parents. I swiped up on her profile and found the link she had pinned in her biography. It directed me straight to a GoFundMe campaign titled Save Our Parents from Elder Abuse. The fundraising goal was set at exactly $15,000. Brittany had filled the campaign description with outright lies claiming the money would be used to hire an emergency defense attorney to fight my supposed financial tyranny. The campaign had only been live for 10 hours, but the video had already gone viral. The view count was climbing into the tens of thousands. Local community groups on Facebook were sharing it. Outraged strangers were leaving vile comments calling for my immediate arrest and demanding that my professional licenses be permanently revoked. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. This was no longer just a private family dispute. Brittany had deliberately taken this public, weaponizing the internet to destroy my reputation and extort the money they needed to pay the bank. She thought the public shame would force me to quietly pay them off to make the scandal disappear. She thought I would crumble under the weight of social media outrage. I got out of bed, made my daughter breakfast, and drove her to school with a calm smile on my face. Then I drove straight to my accounting firm. I walked through the glass doors of my office building, mentally preparing a strategy to legally dismantle her fraudulent campaign. But the moment I stepped onto my floor, the atmosphere was completely wrong. My colleagues suddenly stopped talking. People quickly averted their eyes and stared intensely at their computer monitors. The receptionist gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile. Before I could even put my briefcase down at my desk phone rang. It was the executive assistant for the senior managing partner of our firm. She asked me to come to the corner office immediately. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. I knocked twice and opened the heavy mahogany door. The senior partner was sitting behind his desk, looking incredibly grave. Next to him stood the head of our corporate human resources department. On the large smart television mounted to the wall behind his desk, Brittany's tearful TikTok video was paused on a massive scale. The senior partner folded his hands on his desk and looked at me with cold professionalism. He stated that our firm handles sensitive financial data for high net worth clients. He told me that trust is the absolute core of our entire business model. He took a deep breath and informed me that multiple major clients had called that morning after seeing the viral video demanding to know why their accounts were being managed by someone publicly accused of elder financial abuse. He looked me directly in the eyes and said my job was now officially on the line. I did not flinch or break eye contact with the senior partner. Panic is the absolute worst response in a corporate crisis. I took a slow breath and placed my hands neatly in my lap. I explained that the viral video was a calculated extortion attempt orchestrated by my desperate family. I told him my parents had secretly leveraged their fully paid home to underwrite a failing commercial auto loan for my brother-in-law. I clearly explained that their residential property was in severe default, and they needed cash to stall a bank foreclosure. The senior partner listened in absolute silence, his stern expression slowly softening into a look of professional understanding. I assured him that I would not engage in a messy public internet war. I told him that responding online would only validate their absurd claims and drag the name of our prestigious firm further into the mud. Instead, I asked for 48 hours to dismantle their operation using the exact legal and financial tools this firm had spent years teaching me. I firmly promised that by Friday afternoon, the fraudulent campaign would be permanently erased and my professional name completely cleared. The senior partner studied my face for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, he gave a curt nod and told me to get to work. I walked briskly back to my desk and closed my office door. I did not log into social media. I did not record a tearful defense video. I calmly opened my specialized legal drafting software. My sister Brittany thought she was a social media genius, but she was completely financially illiterate. She had tied the GoFundMe payout directly to an account associated with Jamal's auto dealership to bypass personal income tax flags. That was her first fatal mistake. Using my corporate credentials, I ran a rapid metadata scrape on the incoming donations to her campaign. I immediately spotted glaring anomalies. Several anonymous donations originated from the exact same IP address block associated with Jamal's failing business. He was essentially moving his last remaining lines of credit into the GoFundMe to artificially boost the campaign visibility and create a false sense of viral momentum. This is a classic digital money laundering technique known as wash trading. I immediately contacted a trusted former colleague who now worked as a senior federal financial compliance attorney. I sent him the IP logs, the registry proving the account belonged to an indebted commercial entity, and the foreclosure notice. Together, we drafted a blistering emergency subpoena. We submitted the legal injunction directly to the Trust and Safety Division of GoFundMe, citing credible evidence of wire fraud, deceptive fundraising practices, and active money laundering operations. Corporate platforms operate entirely on strict risk mitigation. They do not wait around for a full police investigation when presented with hard forensic evidence of federal financial crimes. Within 3 hours, I refreshed Brittany's viral campaign page. A bright red banner appeared across the top of the screen, stating the fundraiser was currently under administrative review and all associated funds were completely frozen. Not a single dollar could be withdrawn by anyone. Her entire digital extortion plot was neutralized with a single legal document. A very deep sense of profound satisfaction washed over me. I packed up my leather briefcase at the end of the day, feeling an entirely victorious sense of relief. I drove to the local elementary school, picked up Lily, and treated her to some ice cream to make up for the extreme stress of the week. We listened to upbeat music and laughed on the pleasant drive back to our quiet suburban neighborhood. But the moment my car turned into my driveway, the joyful atmosphere instantly vanished. I immediately slammed on the brakes, my bright headlights illuminating a horrifying scene on my front porch. My daughter let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her small hands in sheer terror. Lying directly in front of my heavy wooden door was Lily's bright pink bicycle. It was completely destroyed. The thick rubber tires were slashed into jagged ribbons, the aluminum frame was bent entirely out of shape, and the delicate wicker basket she loved so much was crushed into splintered fragments. I quickly told Lily to stay safely locked inside the car. I stepped out into the cold evening air, my heart pounding furiously against my ribs. I slowly walked up the front porch steps, the sound of my boots crunching on broken plastic reflectors. Pinned to the twisted handlebars was a piece of ripped notebook paper. The handwriting was jagged and frantic, unmistakably belonging to my sister Brittany. I pulled the note off the ruined metal. It warned me that I would pay dearly for locking up their money and that my family's physical safety was no longer guaranteed. I stood frozen on the porch, holding the ripped notebook paper. My hands trembled not out of fear, but from a deep, consuming rage. Brittany had crossed the line from digital extortion to physical vandalism. I immediately took several clear photographs of the destroyed bicycle and the threatening note for my growing legal file. I walked back to my car, got back into the driver's seat, and drove my terrified daughter to a nearby hotel for the night. I was not going to let Lily sleep in a house they felt comfortable attacking. The next morning, while I was sitting at the hotel desk arranging a private security patrol for my property, an email chimed on my laptop. It was a formal legal summons from the prestigious law firm of Harrison and Associates, the attorneys who had represented my parents for over 30 years. The email demanded my mandatory presence at their downtown office at exactly 2 p.m. to discuss urgent matters regarding the family estate. They thought a fancy letterhead would intimidate me. They were severely mistaken. I arranged for Lily to have a play date at the house of her best friend, put on my sharpest business suit, and drove straight to the financial district. I walked into the sprawling mahogany reception area of the law firm exactly on time. An assistant escorted me into a massive conference room overlooking the city skyline. My parents, Richard and Susan, were already seated on one side of the long, polished table. They both sat rigidly with their arms crossed, wearing matching expressions of self-righteous indignation. Sitting at the head of the table was Mr. Harrison, a silver-haired attorney who looked deeply uncomfortable being caught in the middle of a family feud. I placed my leather briefcase on the table, sat down directly across from my parents, and calmly asked them why I had been pulled away from my workday. My father leaned forward, slamming his hand flat against the heavy table. He declared that I had officially disgraced the family name. He told the lawyer how I maliciously froze the charitable funds meant to save their lives and refused to contribute a single dime to my niece and her milestone birthday. He looked at me with absolute disgust and stated that they had given me a privileged upbringing, paid for my elite education, and this was how I repaid them. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat awkwardly, opening a thick leather-bound folder. He slid a dense stack of legal documents across the polished table toward me. He explained in a slow, measured voice that my parents were offering me one final chance to rectify my massive mistakes. The terms were brutally simple. I had to immediately contact the corporate offices of GoFundMe to completely lift the administrative freeze, allowing the $15,000 to flow directly into the account of Jamal. Furthermore, I was required to write a certified bank check for $5,000 to my mother before leaving the building. If I refused these strict conditions, the document sitting in front of me would be immediately executed. Mr. Harrison tapped the thick paper and stated that my parents would permanently remove me from their last will and testament. I would be legally stripped of any future claim to their estate, their financial assets, and most importantly, the sprawling brick family home I grew up in. Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. She told me I would be left with absolutely nothing, entirely cut off from the generational wealth I so clearly took for granted. The silence in the grand conference room was heavy and expectant. My parents sat back in their expensive leather chairs waiting for me to break down, apologize, and frantically reach for my checkbook to save my inheritance. They genuinely believed that the threat of losing the family estate was their ultimate trump card. They thought they had cornered the cold, calculating accountant. I stared at the dense legal documents for a long moment. Then a low chuckle escaped my lips. The chuckle quickly grew into a full, genuine laugh that echoed loudly off the glass walls. Richard and Susan exchanged highly confused, panicked glances. Mr. Harrison looked completely bewildered by my reaction. I did not bother to read a single line of the complicated legal jargon they had paid thousands of dollars to draft. I simply reached into my suit jacket, pulled out my heavy silver fountain pen, and uncapped it. I flipped directly to the final signature page. While my parents watched in absolute stunned silence, I signed my name with bold, decisive strokes, legally surrendering every single right to their precious estate. I pushed the signed papers back across the polished table, maintaining a bright, terrifying smile. Mr. Harrison stared down at the freshly inked signature as if I had just signed a dark pact with the devil. He blinked rapidly, pulling his reading glasses down the bridge of his nose, completely failing to mask his absolute professional shock. In his 30 years of practicing family law, he had likely watched countless estranged children break down in tears, frantically offering apologies and writing massive checks just to preserve their slice of generational wealth. He had never seen someone gleefully terminate their own inheritance with a silver fountain pen and a genuine smile. My mother, Susan, let out a sharp, offended gasp. She slammed her designer handbag onto the table, her face flushing a deep, angry red. She loudly demanded to know what was wrong with me, asking if I was having a severe psychiatric breakdown. She yelled that I was throwing away millions of dollars over a simple family disagreement. My father, Richard, tried to maintain his authoritative posture, but his hands were slightly trembling. He aggressively pointed a shaking finger at me and declared that this sudden decision was permanent. He warned me that when he passed away, I would not receive a single dime, and my daughter Lily would get absolutely nothing. He stated that I was making the biggest financial mistake of my entire life. I slowly stood up from my leather chair. I buttoned my suit jacket, smoothed out the fabric, and leaned across the heavy mahogany table. I placed both of my hands flat against the polished wood, bringing my face just inches away from my father. The room fell dead silent. I looked him directly in the eyes, lowering my voice so the lawyer would not catch every single word, but making sure my father heard me perfectly clear. I told him he was absolutely right about this being a permanent decision. I thanked him for doing me the greatest legal favor of my entire adult life. I told him I knew exactly what was really happening behind his closed doors. I stated that I had run his personal financial records right alongside Jamal's business accounts. My father, Richard, completely stopped breathing. The angry color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. I kept my voice calm and razor sharp. I told him I knew about the massive commercial bank loan he had secretly guaranteed, using the family house as collateral. I told him I knew the property was currently sitting in severe default and that the bank was actively preparing to foreclose. But more importantly, I leaned in even closer and told him I knew about the specific document the IRS had recently filed against him. I told him I knew he owed the federal government exactly $150,000 in unpaid back taxes. Susan froze, turning to look at her husband in sheer horror. Richard had clearly kept the federal tax lien a complete secret from her. I stood up straight and looked down at both of them. I explained that an estate is only valuable if it possesses actual assets. I told them their estate was nothing but a toxic sinking ship of massive federal debt, predatory commercial loans, and impending bank foreclosures. By forcing me to sign that disinheritance paperwork, they had just legally severed my name from their financial ruin. When the IRS came to seize their bank accounts, and when the commercial lenders came to take their home, no creditor could ever try to attach those catastrophic liabilities to my clean financial record or my personal assets. I picked up my leather briefcase and looked at Mr. Harrison. I politely thanked the attorney for his time and told him he might want to secure an upfront retainer from his clients before their bank accounts were federally frozen. I turned my back on my completely paralyzed parents and walked out of the grand conference room. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing their fate. I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the elevators, feeling much lighter. But as I turned the corner into the main reception area, my victorious stride briefly slowed. Standing right next to the elevator banks, aggressively pacing back and forth, was my brother-in-law, Jamal. He had driven my parents to the meeting. He stopped pacing the moment he saw me. He crossed his massive arms, a smug, victorious sneer spreading across his face. He expected me to walk out of that legal office crying broken and carrying a certified check for $5,000. I walked right past his massive frame, pressed the silver elevator button, and gave him a bright, cheerful wave. The arrogant sneer instantly vanished from his face as he realized his ultimate intimidation tactic had completely and utterly failed. I stepped out of the law firm building and into the bright afternoon sun. I had successfully severed my legal ties to a sinking financial ship, but I knew the blast radius of my actions was about to hit the rest of the family tree. By the time I unlocked my car in the parking garage, my phone was already vibrating violently against the dashboard. News travels at lightning speed in a toxic family, especially when the golden child realizes she is about to lose her primary funding. Over the next 48 hours, my phone was absolutely flooded with hateful text messages and aggressive voicemails. In psychology, they call these people flying monkeys. They are the extended relatives and enablers who blindly do the bidding of the abuser without ever asking for the actual truth. My aunt left a sobbing voicemail accusing me of literally putting my elderly parents on the street. My cousin texted me to say I was a sociopath who only cared about spreadsheets and money. Not a single one of them knew about the massive tax debt or the impending commercial foreclosure. They only knew the twisted narrative my mother and sister had carefully spun to protect their own fragile egos. I did not engage. I simply hit block one by one, methodically silencing the endless noise. I truly thought my absolute silence would eventually force them to back down. But toxic people do not respect boundaries. They view them as a direct personal challenge. On Thursday afternoon, while I was reviewing a corporate audit at my desk, my cell phone rang loudly. The caller identification displayed the name of my daughter Lily's elementary school. My stomach instantly dropped into a cold knot. I answered the phone, and the school principal spoke in a hushed, nervous tone. She told me that a large man matching Jamal's description was currently pacing back and forth outside the playground fence during afternoon recess. He was not trying to enter the building, but he had positioned himself right against the chain-link fence, staring directly at my 10-year-old daughter. When a recess monitor asked him to step back from the school perimeter, Jamal had aggressively yelled at the teacher, claiming he had a family right to see his niece. He had intentionally made sure Lily saw him standing there glaring at her. It was a silent, menacing promise of the violence he had threatened in that ripped notebook paper left on her ruined bicycle. I told the principal to immediately bring Lily inside and lock the exterior doors. I grabbed my keys, abandoned my spreadsheet, and sprinted out of my office building. By the time I arrived at the school, Jamal had already sped off in his massive black SUV. I found Lily sitting in the principal's office, her small hands shaking in sheer terror as she clutched her backpack. Seeing the absolute fear in my innocent child's eyes completely erased any lingering shred of familial mercy I had left inside my heart. I thanked the principal, requested a digital copy of the exterior security footage, and drove Lily straight to a safe location. I did not call Jamal to scream at him. I did not call my sister. I drove directly to the county courthouse and filed an emergency petition for a strict legal protective order. Because Jamal had threatened a minor at a public school, the local magistrate granted an expedited emergency hearing the very next morning. Jamal strutted into the small courtroom wearing a tailored suit, looking confident. When it was his turn to speak, Jamal put on a masterful theatrical performance. He looked the judge dead in the eye and claimed this was all a massive misunderstanding. He tried to play the race card, arguing that as a large African-American man, his mere physical presence was often unfairly perceived as threatening. He claimed he was simply walking by the school and wanted to say a loving hello to his niece. The judge turned to me. I did not raise my voice or argue. I handed the bailiff a heavily documented manila folder. It contained the high-definition Ring camera footage of Jamal aggressively spitting on my driveway, the threatening handwritten note left on the slashed bicycle, and the school security video showing him intimidating a teacher and a terrified 10-year-old girl. The judge watched the footage in absolute silence. He then slammed his gavel down, completely shutting Jamal up. He granted a permanent restraining order, barring Jamal from coming within 500 feet of me or my daughter. Jamal stormed out of the courtroom in a blinding rage, but his anger meant nothing to me anymore. I was untouchable. Or so I thought until checking my mail the following morning. Walking out of the courthouse with the permanent restraining order officially secured, I felt a temporary but profound sense of relief. Jamal could no longer legally approach me or my daughter Lily without facing immediate arrest. But my analytical mind could not let go of a glaring financial discrepancy I had noticed during my initial audit of his auto dealership. He had absolutely zero inventory turnover and was buried under a mountain of commercial debt, yet his business accounts still showed occasional massive cash deposits. These sporadic infusions of capital were the only things keeping the bank from immediately locking the doors of his showroom. I decided to dig back into his financial records, specifically targeting the origin of those large cash deposits. I pulled up the public claims registry and cross-referenced it with the tax identification number of his business. What I found was a highly coordinated, incredibly illegal operation that made his GoFundMe scam look like a minor misunderstanding. Jamal was not just a terrible businessman. He was actively running a sophisticated commercial insurance fraud ring. Over the past 2 years, his dealership had reported an astonishingly high number of total loss vehicle accidents. According to the claims, luxury cars that had been sitting unsold on his lot for months were suddenly being severely damaged in lot collisions, mysterious overnight fires, and hit-and-run accidents during supposed customer test drives. The insurance companies were blindly paying out full market value for depreciating assets that Jamal could never sell to actual buyers. He was intentionally staging the destruction of his own unsold inventory to to collect the massive insurance payouts. He then used that fraudulent cash to pay the minimum monthly interest on his massive commercial loan, temporarily keeping the bank at bay. It was a classic desperate Ponzi scheme built entirely on vehicular destruction and corporate deceit. As a professional forensic accountant, I know exactly how major insurance companies investigate systemic fraud. They look for distinct operational patterns, repeated vehicle identification numbers, and overlapping financial timelines. I meticulously compiled a secure, highly encrypted digital dossier. I downloaded the vehicle identification numbers of every single luxury car involved in his suspicious claims. I mapped out the dates of the supposed accidents, highlighting how they perfectly aligned with the exact days his commercial loan payments were due. I even found matching public repair records from a shady local auto body shop that Jamal frequently used, proving the shop was artificially inflating the repair estimates to maximize the illicit payouts. I gathered bank routing numbers, dates of the insurance wire transfers, and the corresponding withdrawals Jamal made to cover his personal expenses. The paper trail was absolutely undeniable. It was a guaranteed federal indictment wrapped neatly in a comprehensive digital package. I did not take this damning information directly to the local police department. Local precincts are often severely understaffed and lack the specialized financial resources required to aggressively prosecute complex commercial insurance fraud. Instead, I contacted an independent corporate fraud investigator who works exclusively for the National Coalition of Auto Insurance Providers. These specialized investigators have the immediate legal authority to freeze corporate insurance policies, audit all previous payouts, and initiate federal wire fraud charges. I created a secure, untraceable email address and attached the heavily encrypted dossier. I wrote a concise, highly technical summary of the staged accident ring, provided Jamal's exact corporate tax identification number, and hit send. I was officially a corporate whistleblower. I knew the insurance coalition would immediately dispatch a ruthless team of forensic auditors to raid his dealership. Jamal was about to face the full, terrifying weight of the federal legal system. With the whistleblower tip successfully submitted and verified, I knew it would take a few days for the federal agents to assemble their warrants. But the wheels of justice were already in motion. I closed my laptop and felt a genuine sense of final closure. I had legally protected my daughter and systematically dismantled the fraudulent empire of the man who violently threatened her. I walked out to my mailbox that chilly Tuesday afternoon, expecting nothing but standard utility bills. Instead, sitting right on top of a stack of mundane junk mail was a thick, heavy envelope. It was crafted from expensive cream-colored cardstock and sealed with dripping red wax. The address on the front was handwritten in sweeping, elegant calligraphy. I broke the thick wax seal with my thumb and pulled out a gold-embossed VIP invitation. It was a formal request to attend my niece Sydney's 15th birthday gala, scheduled to take place at the highly exclusive Plaza Hotel downtown. Clipped to the corner of the heavy invitation was a small handwritten note on my mother's personal stationery. The message from Susan contained only 5 chilling, threatening words. Last chance to repent, Megan. I stared at those 5 threatening words. Last chance to repent, Megan. My mother believed extending an invitation to a birthday party was an ultimate olive branch I would normally accept. But my analytical mind immediately caught a massive logical inconsistency. Jamal was completely broke. My parents were facing an imminent bank foreclosure. So how exactly were they funding a lavish VIP gala at the Plaza Hotel, easily one of the most expensive venues in the entire city? Why were they so desperate for me to attend after I had cut them out of my life and filed a restraining order against Jamal? The math did not add up. In the world of forensic accounting, when numbers on the surface look impossible, it means there is a secondary set of books hidden underneath. I took my laptop to the kitchen island, poured a cup of black coffee, and started digging into the details of this extravagant event. I still had the login credentials to my mother's shared family calendar from years ago, an oversight she had clearly forgotten about. I logged in and found the digital itinerary for Sydney's birthday. Attached to the calendar event was a master spreadsheet containing the finalized guest list. I opened the file expecting to see the names of my niece's high school friends, extended family members, and local neighbors. Instead, my eyes scanned a list of highly targeted, extremely wealthy individuals. There were local real estate developers, angel investors, retired executives, and prominent business owners from across the county. There were barely any teenagers on the list. The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. This was never a birthday party. The $5,000 a plate entry fee was not to pay for balloons and a cake. Jamal and Brittany were using their daughter's milestone birthday as a deceptive, highly illegal fundraising front. They had invited dozens of wealthy local investors to a luxurious setting to pitch them a fraudulent investment opportunity in Jamal's failing car dealership. They were planning to use the lavish Plaza Hotel ballroom to project an illusion of massive success, hoping to scam enough immediate cash from these unsuspecting investors to pay off the bank and save my parents' house from foreclosure. It was an unregistered securities offering disguised as a family celebration. They wanted me there because my presence as a certified forensic accountant would silently validate their fraudulent claims. If the wealthy investors saw a legitimate financial professional sitting at the head table, they would naturally assume Jamal's business was a safe and profitable investment. My parents were trying to use my hard-earned professional reputation to underwrite their massive Ponzi scheme. I closed the spreadsheet, a cold and calculated smile spreading across my face. They were trying to raise enough capital to pay off the regional bank holding their defaulted loan. But I knew exactly how commercial banks operated. When a loan is in severe default and backed by a fraudulent business, the bank does not actually want the massive headache of going through a prolonged foreclosure process. They want to offload the bad debt immediately, even if they have to sell it for pennies on the dollar just to get the toxic asset off their books. I picked up my phone and called the private cell number of my accounting firm's wealthiest corporate client. He was the chief executive officer of a massive aggressive real estate conglomerate that specialized in acquiring distressed commercial properties. I had saved his company millions of dollars in tax liabilities over the past 3 years, and he trusted my financial instincts completely. He answered on the second ring. I did not waste time with small talk. I told him I had a highly lucrative off-market acquisition opportunity that required his immediate attention. I explained that a prime piece of commercial real estate, the exact lot where Jamal's dealership currently sat, was tied to a severely defaulted loan at a local regional bank. I laid out the exact numbers, showing him that because the bank was desperate, his conglomerate could swoop in and quietly purchase the entire debt portfolio for a fraction of its actual market value. By purchasing the debt, his company would instantly become the primary lien holder on both the commercial lot and the residential property my parents had foolishly used as collateral. The executive listened intently, recognizing the brilliant financial maneuver. He agreed immediately, authorizing his legal team to initiate the silent buyout first thing the next morning. I hung up the phone looking down at the gold-embossed invitation. Jamal and my parents thought they were going to the plaza to save their empire. They had no idea that I had just successfully orchestrated the complete corporate takeover of their entire lives. I tossed the threatening gold-embossed invitation onto my kitchen counter. Last chance to repent. The sheer arrogance of my mother's handwritten note was almost laughable. They honestly believed they held all the cards, entirely unaware that the massive real estate conglomerate I represented was already finalizing the hostile takeover of their toxic bank debt. I had initially planned to ignore the lavish birthday gala and let the federal insurance investigators raid Jamal's failing car dealership on their own timeline. But that 5-word note changed my mind completely. If they wanted me to attend their fraudulent fundraising event to silently validate their massive Ponzi scheme, I would gladly oblige. I would walk right into their luxurious Plaza Hotel ballroom and personally deliver the financial execution they so deeply deserved. Because this was a highly exclusive event, the dress code was strictly black tie. I owned a breathtaking floor-length emerald green designer gown that I purchased years ago for a corporate banquet. It was elegant and perfectly appropriate for a high-stakes evening. Early Friday morning, the day before the grand event, I carefully packed the expensive gown in a protective garment bag. I brought it to my upscale health club downtown, which offered a premium on-site dry cleaning service for executive members. I handed the bag to the locker room valet, instructing her to press out the minor wrinkles while I completed my morning workout. I planned to pick it up on my way to the office, ensuring it was flawless for Saturday night. I spent an hour on the treadmill channeling all my lingering frustration into a punishing run. Sweaty but energized, I walked into the luxurious executive locker room to shower and get ready for the workday. I approached my assigned private locker, swiped my electronic key fob, and pulled the heavy wooden door open. The breath instantly left my lungs. My beautiful emerald green designer gown was not neatly hung on the wooden valet hook. It lay crumpled in a pathetic heap at the bottom of the locker. I dropped my gym bag and fell to my knees, reaching out to touch the dark green silk. The dress was completely and utterly destroyed. Someone had taken heavy, jagged shears and violently slashed the delicate fabric into dozens of unrecognizable ribbons. The intricate bodice was aggressively cut straight down the middle, and the long, flowing skirt was shredded into frayed, useless strips. It was a vicious, highly personal act of pure vandalism. My family knew exactly what I was planning to wear because my mother had specifically purchased the matching shoes for me years ago. They had actively tracked my morning routine, bypassed the health club security, and orchestrated a targeted strike against my wardrobe. I did not shed a single tear over the ruined silk. I immediately stood up, left the shredded gown on the floor, and marched straight to the general manager's office in the main lobby. I demanded an immediate review of the security cameras. The manager quickly pulled up the digital surveillance logs. While privacy laws prevent cameras inside locker rooms, the main hallways and the entrance to the women's executive suite are heavily monitored. We scrubbed through the high-definition footage from the exact hour I was running on the treadmill. My eyes locked onto the screen. Walking confidently down the carpeted hallway was my 15-year-old niece, Sydney. She was wearing an oversized hooded sweatshirt, carrying a large designer tote bag. She casually swiped a stolen guest pass at the entrance. 10 minutes later, the camera caught her walking briskly back out. As she reached into her tote bag to grab her cell phone, the bright overhead lights clearly caught the metallic glint of a massive pair of industrial fabric scissors resting inside. A smug, victorious smirk was plastered across her young face. Brittany and Jamal had weaponized their own teenage daughter. They sent Sydney to do their dirty work, cowardly, assuming I would never file criminal property damage charges against a 15-year-old girl. They wanted to humiliate me, break my spirit, and guarantee I would not show up. They fully expected me to sit at home crying over a ruined dress. They expected me to surrender. Instead, I calmly thanked the gym manager and walked out into the brisk morning air. A ruined silk dress was simply an emblem of the past. I drove straight to the most exclusive luxury boutique in the financial district. I did not ask to see evening gowns. I demanded their sharpest, most aggressive custom-tailored power suit. I selected a striking midnight black blazer with structured shoulders and matching trousers. It was the armor of a ruthless executive. I was no longer playing their games. I was going to war. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp chill in the city air. I helped Lily into a beautiful navy blue velvet dress that made her look so grown up. She twirled in front of the hallway mirror, completely unaware of the absolute financial carnage her family was about to unleash. I slipped into my new custom-tailored midnight black power suit. The structured shoulders and sharp lines gave me an imposing, untouchable silhouette. I paired it with sleek leather heels and pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek twist. I looked exactly like what I was, a high-level corporate assassin. We drove downtown toward the Plaza Hotel, the glowing city lights reflecting off the windshield. I felt a cold mechanical calm settle over my entire body. I was not walking into a family celebration. I was walking into a highly active crime scene. We handed my car keys to the white-gloved valet and stepped through the iconic revolving brass doors of the legendary hotel. The grand main lobby of the Plaza Hotel was a masterclass in overwhelming opulence and historical beauty. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported marble floors. I held Lily by the hand and guided her toward the grand ballroom on the mezzanine level. The entrance was flanked by towering floral arrangements of white roses and orchids. A polished mahogany welcome table was set up near the double doors, staffed by two hotel event coordinators. Beyond the open doors, I could see the extravagant setup. A live jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner. Waiters in pristine tuxedos circulated through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne and expensive caviar appetizers. Jamal and Brittany were holding court in the center of the room, desperately trying to look like wealthy socialites. Jamal was wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket, loudly laughing, and aggressively shaking hands with the targeted local investors. Brittany was wearing a sparkling silver gown, clinging to his arm and flashing her incredibly fake smile. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire financial world was currently collapsing around them. I slowly stepped into the grand entryway, making absolutely sure I was fully visible to the entire room. It only took about 10 seconds for my mother to finally spot me standing there. Susan was standing near the towering champagne tower holding a crystal flute. The moment her eyes locked onto my sharp black suit, her fake socialite smile instantly vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic and rage. She slammed her champagne glass down onto a nearby table, spilling expensive liquor onto the white linen tablecloth. She marched straight toward the entrance, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She positioned her body directly in the center of the double doors, physically blocking me and Lily from entering the ballroom. She did not bother to lower her voice. She wanted to make a public scene, hoping to humiliate me into running away. She loudly demanded to know what on earth I was doing there. She pointed an accusatory finger at my chest and yelled that this was an exclusive high-end private event. She told the surrounding guests that I was a bitter, jealous daughter who had completely abandoned the family in their absolute darkest hour of financial need. She crossed her arms and loudly declared that unless I was holding a certified cashier check for $10,000 to cover my entrance fee and my past disrespect, I needed to turn around and leave her sight immediately. The live jazz music seemed to quiet down as the wealthy investors near the entrance turned to watch the commotion. Lily squeezed my hand nervously, but I gave her a reassuring smile. I looked my mother directly in the eyes with a feeling of absolute unwavering confidence. I did not raise my voice, but my tone was sharp enough to cut through solid glass. I reached into the inside pocket of my black blazer and pulled out a folded piece of thick watermarked hotel stationery. I unfolded the document and held it up so the surrounding investors could clearly see the bright red official paid stamp from the hotel accounting department. I told my mother to lower her voice before she completely embarrassed herself in front of her wealthy guests. I stated clearly that she was absolutely right about me not paying her ridiculous $5,000 door fee. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, physically forcing her to step back. I looked her up and down with absolute pity. I told her I didn't pay the door fee, but I did pay the $50,000 venue rental this morning when Jamal's credit card declined. The grand entrance of the ballroom suddenly felt incredibly small. My statement hung in the air, echoing off the marble pillars. The wealthy investors standing near the doorway completely stopped their polite conversations. A prominent real estate developer I recognized from my firm's client roster slowly turned around, his eyebrows raised in sharp curiosity. He had just written Jamal a massive check, believing this event was fully funded by a highly successful luxury auto empire. Hearing that the host's credit card had declined for the venue rental was the ultimate financial red flag. A low wave of hushed, confused whispers instantly began rippling through the crowded room. My mother Susan stood completely frozen, her jaw practically hitting the floor. She had absolutely no idea the credit card had declined. Jamal and Brittany had clearly kept the severe severity of their immediate cash flow crisis hidden even from her. She looked frantically around the room, realizing that her desperate attempt to humiliate me had backfired in the most public, spectacular way possible. From the center of his ballroom, Jamal noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. He pushed past a group of elderly investors, his face flushed an angry, sweaty red. He stomped over to the entrance, glaring down at me with absolute fury. He aggressively grabbed the arm of the hotel event coordinator standing at the welcome table. He loudly demanded that she call hotel security immediately to have me forcefully removed from the premises for trespassing and causing a massive public disturbance. He yelled that I was a crazy, estranged relative trying to ruin his daughter's birthday. The event coordinator looked incredibly uncomfortable. She adjusted her headset, pulling up the digital reservation file on her tablet. She nervously cleared her throat and looked directly at Jamal. She stated in a clear professional tone that she could not call security to remove me. She turned the tablet screen toward him, showing the finalized financial ledger. She explained that his original corporate credit card had indeed been flagged and declined for insufficient funds at 8 o'clock that morning. She then confirmed to the entire surrounding crowd that I, Megan, had personally wired the full $50,000 balance directly to the hotel's accounting department just 2 hours later. She looked Jamal dead in the eyes and delivered the ultimate blow. She stated that because I was the sole individual who legally paid for the venue rental, I was now officially the registered host of the evening. She informed Jamal that if anyone was going to be escorted off the property, it would be him at my direct request. The silence that followed was absolute. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly sounded incredibly loud. Jamal took a heavy step backward, wiping a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. His entire tough guy persona completely evaporated in front of his targeted investors. He looked like a cornered rat. He had spent the entire evening projecting the image of a wealthy, untouchable CEO. And now everyone in the room knew he couldn't even afford the room they were standing in. The real estate developer, who had overheard my initial comment, slowly reached into his suit jacket, pulled out his phone, and quietly stepped out into the hallway, likely calling his bank to frantically cancel his investment check. Seeing her husband completely paralyzed and the investors starting to physically back away, Brittany realized she was rapidly losing control of the narrative. She decided to deploy her ultimate weapon. She hiked up the skirt of her sparkling silver gown and practically ran onto the small, elevated stage at the front of the ballroom. She aggressively grabbed the microphone from the jazz singer's microphone stand. The harsh sound of audio feedback pierced the room, forcing everyone to cover their ears and look directly at her. Brittany gripped the microphone with both hands, her chest heaving as she forced massive, dramatic tears to stream down her perfectly contoured face. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. Her voice cracked with manufactured emotion as she addressed the entire ballroom. She told the wealthy crowd not to listen to a single word I was saying. She claimed that the stress of our parents' recent medical issues had caused me to suffer a complete and total psychiatric breakdown. She yelled that I was deeply unwell, dangerously delusional, and obsessively stalking her family. She begged the crowd for their sympathy, claiming she was just trying to protect her innocent daughter, Sydney, from her completely insane aunt. She clutched the microphone tightly, preparing to launch into a full-blown hysterical monologue about my supposed mental illness. Brittany's voice echoed through the massive ballroom, amplified to an agonizing volume by the professional sound system. She wept, telling the horrified investors I was recently diagnosed with severe paranoia. She claimed I was financially cutting off our elderly parents out of pure delusion, and that my presence tonight was a dangerous, unhinged attempt to destroy the only family that still loved me. The wealthy guests exchanged highly uncomfortable glances. A few people stepped back, not wanting involvement in a psychiatric emergency. Susan nodded from the entrance, playing the heartbroken matriarch perfectly. They expected me to yell back. They expected me to scream that she was lying, to lose my temper, and to effectively prove her narrative of mental instability right then and there. I did no such thing. I looked down at my 10-year-old daughter. Lily gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze and guided her to a quiet alcove near the coat check. I asked the hotel event coordinator to watch her for 5 minutes. I turned my attention to the room's technical layout. While Brittany continued to sob dramatically center stage, I calmly adjusted the cuffs of my black blazer and began walking briskly along the perimeter of the grand ballroom. I bypassed the bewildered investors. My target was the elevated audio-visual control booth located at the back right corner of the room designated for the hotel's technical staff. The booth was currently occupied by a single young technician wearing a black polo shirt. He stared at Brittany on stage, completely unsure if he should cut the microphone feed. I approached the soundboard with the absolute authority of someone who owned the building. I looked the young man in the eye, flashed my firm corporate smile, and informed him that as the legal sponsor of tonight's $50,000 venue rental, I needed immediate access to the main projection feed. I pulled my corporate tablet from my blazer. I did not wait for his permission. I reached over the complex soundboard, located the primary HDMI input cable resting next to the master laptop, and firmly plugged it directly into my tablet adapter. My forensic accounting software was already booted up, securely preloaded with every single piece of financial evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past week. I bypassed the standard mode and mirrored my screen directly to the master output. I tapped one single button to wake the system. High above the stage, the massive state-of-the-art drop-down projector screen suddenly hummed to life. The bright white light flooded the front of the ballroom, casting a massive, blinding shadow of Brittany right over the front row of investors. She was so completely absorbed in her tearful, fabricated monologue about my supposed mental illness that she did not even notice the blinding light illuminating behind her. She kept crying into the microphone, begging the crowd to open their hearts and their wallets to support Jamal's business so they could afford to send me to a proper psychiatric facility. But the wealthy investors were no longer looking at her perfectly contoured, tear-stained face. Every single pair of eyes in that luxurious ballroom was now glued to the massive high-definition screen suspended directly above her head. The soft jazz music had completely stopped. The room fell into an eerie, suffocating silence, broken only by the amplified sound of Brittany's fake sobs. I stood at the back of the room, my hand resting calmly on the audio-visual control board, and tapped the screen of my tablet to advance to the very first slide. The screen displayed a magnified PDF document. It was the official bank statement for the checking account, directly linked to her viral GoFundMe campaign. I had legally obtained the routing records during my federal subpoena, and I made sure the high-resolution scan highlighted the most damning lines of data in bright, undeniable yellow. The header of the document clearly displayed the title of her charitable campaign, Save Our Parents from Elder Abuse. Just below that noble title was the itemized ledger of outgoing wire transfers. The crowd gasped, almost in perfect unison. The ledger proved that not a single dollar had gone to medical bills, legal defense, or my parents' impending foreclosure. Instead, the screen clearly showed an outgoing wire transfer of $12,500 sent directly to an exclusive luxury boutique in Paris for the purchase of a rare Hermes Birkin handbag. Right below that, a second highlighted transaction showed an outgoing payment of $2,000 sent to a premium cosmetic dermatology clinic in the financial district, specifically categorized under injectable Botox treatments. The charity money meant for our supposedly dying parents was sitting on Brittany's arm and injected directly into her forehead. The collective gasp from the wealthy investors was loud enough to drown out the faint background music. On stage, Brittany finally turned around to look at the massive projection screen. The heavy microphone slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers, hitting the wooden stage floor with a deafening screech of audio feedback. She stared at the highlighted bank transfers, her jaw trembling as she realized her charitable facade was completely destroyed. The wealthy guests looked at her with pure disgust. There is nothing high society hates more than being taken for fools by cheap scam artists. My mother Susan covered her mouth in sheer horror, finally seeing the undeniable proof of where her golden child was spending the supposed emergency funds. But I was not finished. A true forensic accountant never stops halfway through an audit. I tapped the tablet screen again, advancing to the second phase of my financial autopsy. The projection screen shifted instantly. The bank statements vanished, replaced by the highly confidential itemized profit and loss statements for Jamal's luxury auto dealership. I made sure the font was large enough for the elderly investors in the back row to read clearly. For the past hour, Jamal had been aggressively shaking hands, promising these sophisticated angel investors double-digit returns and corporate expansion. The glowing spreadsheet above his head told the brutal objective truth. I had highlighted the bottom line net revenue for the past 36 consecutive months in a blinding, undeniable shade of red. The dealership was not just failing, it was a catastrophic financial black hole. The numbers proved his inventory turnover was non-existent. The documents showed his massive predatory commercial loans and the devastating interest rates he was failing to pay. The room watched in stunned silence as the screen scrolled through outstanding legal judgments, unpaid commercial cleaning bills, and severe municipal tax liens. The real estate developer standing near the doorway scoffed loudly, shaking his head at the absolute absurdity of Jamal's earlier corporate pitch. Jamal stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, his velvet tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. But the red ink was only the appetizer. It was time to show the investors the actual federal crimes they were about to unknowingly underwrite. I swiped my finger across the tablet, bringing up the most damning slide of the entire evening. The screen split into two distinct columns. On the left side were the vehicle identification numbers of 6 different high-end luxury cars sitting on Jamal's lot. On the right side were official commercial insurance payout records. I had meticulously linked the corresponding dates. I watched the faces of the investors as they read the explicit data. The records showed a highly suspicious pattern of catastrophic lot collisions and mysterious overnight fires, always occurring exactly 3 days before Jamal's massive commercial bank payments were due. I projected the repair estimates from his preferred shady auto body shop, highlighting the artificially inflated costs. The data painted a crystal-clear picture of a highly coordinated systemic commercial insurance fraud ring. Jamal was intentionally destroying his own unsold, depreciating inventory to collect illicit payouts just to keep the lights on. The investors immediately realized that if they had written a check tonight, they would have been legally tying their clean corporate money directly to a massive active federal felony. The wealthy guests began loudly demanding their investment checks back, creating a chaotic chorus of angry, betrayed voices ringing throughout the luxurious plaza ballroom. Jamal finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He looked up at the massive projection screen, then turned his furious gaze toward the audio-visual control booth at the back of the room. His eyes locked directly onto me, his face contorted into a mask of pure violent rage. He let out a feral roar, shoving past an elderly investor, and charged blindly down the center aisle. He was a massive man, fueled by the desperate realization that his entire fraudulent empire had just been publicly executed. He sprinted toward the technical booth, his heavy boots pounding against the marble floor, clearly intending to physically tear me apart. I did not flinch, and I did not step back. I simply stood my ground, completely unafraid of his desperate anger. Before Jamal could even reach the first step of the elevated booth, 2 massive men in tailored dark suits materialized from the crowd. They were the highly trained private security details hired by the wealthy real estate developers. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. The first guard grabbed Jamal's right arm, twisting it sharply behind his back, while the second guard swept his legs out from under him. Jamal hit the hard, polished marble floor face first with a very heavy thud, leaving him completely and utterly neutralized. The loud thud of Jamal hitting the marble floor echoed through the silent ballroom. The 2 massive private security guards kept him firmly pinned, his cheek pressed hard against the cold, polished stone. He grunted and struggled, but the guards applied just enough pressure to keep him entirely immobile. The wealthy investors collectively took another large step back, completely horrified by the sudden, violent escalation. From the chaotic center of the room, my father Richard finally broke his paralyzed silence. He pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face purple with absolute fury. He pointed a shaking finger up at me in the audio-visual booth and began to scream. He yelled that I was a complete monster. He demanded that I shut off the projector immediately and stop destroying our family in front of the entire city. He claimed I was a bitter, vindictive child who could not stand to see her sister succeed, and that I was intentionally ruining the only chance they had to survive a temporary financial setback. His voice cracked with desperate panic as he begged the investors not to listen to my presentation, insisting that family matters should remain strictly private. I looked down at my father from the elevated booth. I did not yell back. I spoke into the main microphone connected directly to the soundboard, my voice calm, steady, and echoing with absolute authority. I told him that covering up active federal felonies is not a private family matter. I stated that he and Susan were not innocent victims in this elaborate scheme. They were the primary enablers who had funded and protected Jamal for years, fully aware of his fraudulent business practices. I looked directly into Richard's panicked eyes and told him it was time for the investors to see exactly how far he was willing to go to protect his golden child. I tapped the screen of my tablet one final time. The projection screen above the stage flashed brilliantly, replacing the auto dealership records with a single highly sensitive legal document. I magnified the header so the entire room could read the bold black text. It was the official Notice of Default and Intent to Foreclose, filed directly by their regional bank. I had highlighted the specific section listing the pledged collateral for Jamal's massive commercial loan. The document clearly displayed the exact street address of my parents' sprawling brick colonial house. The ballroom erupted into a wave of shocked whispers. The investors immediately realized the absolute depths of the deception. My parents had secretly leveraged their fully paid primary residence to underwrite Jamal's failing fraudulent auto dealership. The document on the screen proved that they had missed 4 consecutive mortgage payments and were facing imminent, catastrophic bank foreclosure. Susan let out a devastated wail, burying her face in her hands. She had spent her entire adult life meticulously cultivating an image of superior wealth and high society grace. Now her deepest, darkest financial secret was being broadcast in high definition to the exact group of wealthy elites she so desperately wanted to impress. Brittany scrambled down from the stage, trying to comfort our hysterical mother, but Susan violently pushed her golden child away. The realization had finally hit her. They had gambled their entire generational wealth, their secure retirement, and their public reputation on a man who was currently pinned to the floor by private security for committing insurance fraud. Richard stood completely frozen, staring up at the foreclosure notice with wide, terrifying realization. He looked at me, his voice reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper, begging me to take the document down. I leaned closer to the microphone, making sure my final words carried to the very back of the grand ballroom. I told my father I would gladly take the document down because it was actually outdated information. I explained that when a commercial bank holds a severely defaulted loan tied to a fraudulent business, they are eager to sell that toxic debt to the highest bidder just to get it off their books. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy real estate developers in the crowd. They nodded in silent agreement, fully understanding the ruthless mechanics of high-level finance. I announced that as of yesterday morning, I officially represent the massive corporate entity that quietly purchased their entire debt portfolio from the regional bank. The transaction was executed perfectly, finalizing the complete transfer of all underlying assets. I looked straight down at Richard and Susan, delivering the ultimate crushing financial reality. There were absolutely no options left for them to explore. I told them they do not owe the bank anymore. I told them they do not own their beautiful brick colonial home anymore. My client does. The absolute finality of my statement hung heavily in the air of the ballroom. I had just publicly severed the last string holding their fake high society lives together. Richard staggered backward as if he had been physically struck directly in the chest. He bumped into an appetizer table, sending a silver tray of caviar crashing to the marble floor. Susan simply stopped breathing. The reality that a massive corporate entity now held the deed to the only asset they had left completely broke her. She clutched her chest, her eyes darting wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. There was absolutely no escape at all. They had bet their entire generational legacy on a fraudulent car salesman, and they had spectacularly lost everything. Down on the main floor, the wealthy investors were not waiting around to see how the family drama concluded. These were successful, sharp business people. They took one look at the foreclosure notice projected on the screen, looked down at Jamal pinned to the floor by security, and instantly realized they had almost been the victims of a Ponzi scheme. The panic spread through the crowd like a wildfire. Expensive suit jackets rustled as dozens of men and women simultaneously reached into their pockets and purses. The ballroom transformed into a chaotic trading floor. Every investor pulled out their cell phone, frantically dialing their wealth managers, personal bankers, and corporate accountants. The prominent real estate developer who had been standing near the entrance practically yelled into his phone, demanding that his bank place an immediate hard stop on the $50,000 check he had handed Jamal just an hour ago. All around the room, furious guests were loudly canceling wire transfers and freezing their accounts. They realized Jamal had invited them to a fake birthday gala simply to steal their capital to pay off his toxic commercial debt. Brittany stood alone near the edge of the stage, her silver gown sparkling mockingly under the bright chandelier lights. She watched in horror as the investors systematically revoked every dollar of her husband's bailout money. Her illusion of being a wealthy, untouchable socialite was disintegrating in front of her eyes. She looked at Jamal, who was still groaning and struggling underneath the heavy boots of the security guards. She looked at our parents, who were now homeless and drowning in federal tax debt. The golden child finally understood that there was no one left to bail her out. There was no reserve fund. There was no more money. Brittany let out a piercing, guttural scream that echoed over the frantic voices of the investors. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor, tearing at the expensive fabric of her dress, sobbing hysterically. It was not the fake, calculated crying she had used on stage just 10 minutes ago. This was the raw, ugly sound of financial and social destruction. I stood still in the elevated audio-visual booth, watching the collapse of the family that had treated me like garbage for my entire life. I felt no pity. They had abandoned my 10-year-old daughter on her birthday, demanded an extortion fee to fund this exact scam, and then tried to destroy my professional career when I refused to comply. I had given them exactly what they asked for. I brought my forensic accounting skills directly to their party. I reached forward and calmly closed my tablet, shutting off the projection screen. The white canvas above the stage went completely dark, but the chaos on the floor only intensified. The jazz musicians had packed up their instruments and slipped out the back service exit, wanting nothing to do with the unfolding disaster. The hotel event coordinator was frantically speaking into her headset, trying to figure out how to clear the angry, shouting crowd of elites. Jamal managed to lift his head just an inch off the marble, spitting out a string of vicious curses directed at me. He demanded that someone call the hotel security team to arrest me for hacking the projector. But before anyone could even respond to his pathetic demands, a deafening crash echoed from the main entrance. The massive, heavy mahogany double doors of the ballroom were violently thrown completely open, slamming hard against the surrounding walls. The guests instantly went silent, turning their heads toward the entrance, expecting to see a team of hotel managers in tailored suits. Instead, a squad of stern men and women in dark tactical windbreakers stormed directly into the luxurious room. Across the back of their jackets, bright yellow letters spelled out IRS, Criminal Investigation. Flanking them were uniformed officers from the local Economic Crimes Task Force. The federal agents had finally arrived to make arrests. The tactical boots of the federal agents hit the marble floor in perfect unison, establishing absolute authority over the ballroom. The lead investigator from the Internal Revenue Service held up his golden badge, his voice cutting through the panic like a sharp blade. He immediately ordered everyone to remain exactly where they were and keep their hands clearly visible. The wealthy investors accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them immediately fell silent and backed away against the expensive floral arrangements. Two heavily armed local economic police officers bypassed the bewildered crowd and marched straight toward the center of the room. The private security guards who had been pinning Jamal to the floor immediately stepped back, yielding to federal jurisdiction. Jamal was groaning loudly, his velvet tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder and covered in thick dust from the floor. An officer grabbed him by the collar of his expensive dress shirt and hauled his massive frame upward, forcing him to his feet. Jamal swayed heavily, his arrogant demeanor completely shattered into pieces. He tried to adjust his jacket, desperately attempting to salvage some shred of his fake dignity, but the lead federal agent stepped directly into his personal space. The agent did not lower his voice. He wanted the entire room of potential victims to hear exactly why they were raiding this lavish gala tonight. The agent pulled a folded warrant from his tactical jacket and began reading it aloud. He stated loudly that Jamal was being placed under immediate federal arrest. He listed the severe criminal charges with brutal clarity: wire fraud, commercial insurance fraud, defrauding a major financial institution, and operating an unregistered Ponzi-style investment scheme across state lines. The heavy words echoed ominously off the crystal chandeliers. As the agent recited the Miranda warning informing Jamal of his right to remain silent and his right to an attorney, the second officer roughly pulled Jamal's thick arms behind his back. The distinct metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around Jamal's wrists sounded like a final death knell for his fraudulent empire. Jamal did not fight back. He looked down at the polished marble floor, his chest heaving rapidly, his fake gold watch glinting under the bright lights as his hands were tightly bound. The real estate developers and angel investors watched the dramatic arrest with grim satisfaction. Several of them even pulled out their cell phones, snapping photographs of the disgraced businessman in handcuffs. The federal raid was the ultimate, undeniable confirmation that every single financial slide I had projected on that massive screen was completely accurate. They had narrowly avoided pouring millions of dollars into a criminal sinkhole. My father, Richard, stood paralyzed near the catering table, his face totally ashen, watching his golden son-in-law being treated like a common street criminal. Susan had buried her face in her hands, completely unable to witness the absolute destruction of her high society fantasy. But my sister Brittany could not remain silent. She watched the officers march her handcuffed husband toward the grand double doors. The terrifying realization that her luxury lifestyle was permanently over finally snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity she had left. She slowly stood up from the floor. Her silver gown ruined her makeup, smeared down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. She turned away from Jamal and locked her furious eyes directly on me. I was still standing near the elevated audio-visual booth, calmly watching the scene unfold. Brittany let out a piercing, animalistic shriek. She ignored the armed federal agents and the wealthy crowd. She screamed that I had intentionally ruined her entire existence. She yelled that Sydney was going to be completely destroyed by this public humiliation, and that it was all my fault for not simply paying the money they demanded. Blinded by pure toxic rage, Brittany grabbed a heavy crystal champagne flute from a nearby table and charged directly at me. She sprinted up the center aisle, her heels clicking frantically against the stone, aiming the heavy glass right at my face. She expected me to cower, to beg for her forgiveness, to apologize, or to freeze in fear like I did when we were helpless children. She wanted to physically punish me for exposing her massive lies to the world. I stood and watched her sprint toward me with absolute calm. I calculated her wild trajectory and her complete lack of physical coordination in those expensive shoes. Just as she reached the edge of the technical booth and thrust the heavy crystal glass forward with all her might, I simply shifted my weight and took one smooth, deliberate step to the right, letting her momentum carry her straight past me to fall flat on the hard marble floor. Brittany hit the polished marble floor with a sickening thud. Her heavy crystal glass shattered into glittering pieces across the grand ballroom. She lay in her ruined silver gown, sobbing hysterically into the cold stone, completely stripped of her golden child armor. The wealthy investors looked down at her with pure disgust. Two police officers stepped forward, hauling her roughly to her feet. They sternly ordered her to stand down before she found herself sharing a federal holding cell today. Jamal was currently being marched toward the main exit by the federal agents. His head hung low, his heavy boots dragging. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside reflected off the towering glass windows. The illusion of their high society life was officially dead. Susan watched her son-in-law being hauled away in steel handcuffs. She looked at the investors frantically canceling checks, and then at the shattered remains of her daughter's fake public dignity. The crushing reality of their future finally set in. They had no house. They had massive federal tax debt. Now the breadwinner of their fraudulent empire was going to federal prison. Susan turned her frantic gaze toward me. She stumbled away from the catering table, her expensive heels wobbling unsteadily on the floor. She closed the distance between us, her hands shaking violently. For the very first time in my entire life, my mother dropped her mask of arrogant superiority. She grabbed the sleeve of my black blazer. Her eyes were filled with raw terror. She begged me to help them. She pleaded with me to use my corporate accounts to post Jamal's bail. She sobbed, claiming if Jamal stayed in jail, his business would be seized and they would have absolutely no way to fight the bank foreclosure. She wept for Sydney, crying her granddaughter would be homeless and fatherless if I did not intervene right this exact second. Richard hurried over to join her, abandoning his authoritative posture. He looked like an old, broken man. He stood next to his weeping wife and tried to appeal to my sense of familial duty. He told me that blood is thicker than water and that family must always stick together during a crisis. He begged me to call the real estate conglomerate I represented and negotiate a leaseback agreement for their home. He desperately promised to make up for all the years of neglect if I would just write a check to the bail bondsman and save them from the streets. He reached out to touch my shoulder, his hand trembling. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, removing myself entirely from their physical grasp. I looked at my mother's tear-stained face and my father's pathetic, begging posture. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering guilt, no residual desire for their approval, and no hesitation in me today. I looked them directly in the eyes, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that cut right through their frantic sobbing. I reminded them of last weekend. I reminded them of the beautiful garden I had rented, the food I had prepared, and the hand-drawn invitations my daughter had carefully crafted. I told them how I held my beautiful 10-year-old girl as she cried into my shoulder because her grandparents could not be bothered to show up. I told them they had made their choice when they ignored my daughter to protect a criminal. I looked at my parents coldly and delivered my final verdict. You skipped Lily's 10th birthday. Consider this your gift for Sydney's 15th. Susan let out a devastated gasp, collapsing onto a nearby velvet chair. Richard buried his face in his hands, weeping openly now. I turned my back on them forever. I walked calmly across the ballroom, bypassing the whispering investors and the flashing police lights. I found the hotel coordinator in the quiet alcove near the coat check. She was sitting quietly with Lily. I thanked the coordinator, grabbed our coats, and gently took Lily by the hand. My daughter looked up at me, her innocent eyes wide with confusion at the loud noises echoing from the main room. I smiled warmly at her, promising that we were safely going home. I led Lily out of the grand ballroom, stepping through the massive mahogany doors. Behind us, Brittany was screaming hysterically as the police finally dragged Jamal out to the transport van. The deafening wail of police sirens filled the chilly night air, bouncing off the historic hotel walls. I held my head high, gripping my daughter's hand tightly, and walked right out of the plaza, leaving that toxic family to scream, amidst the police sirens drowning permanently in the absolute chaos of their very own sad, pathetic criminal creation. I drove Lily home that Saturday night in complete and utter silence. The chaotic flashing lights of the numerous police cruisers faded slowly in my rearview mirror, quickly replaced by the calm, steady glow of the suburban streetlights. I tucked my exhausted daughter into her warm bed, kissed her forehead, and finally let out a long, deep breath. The emotional war was officially over. I spent Sunday completely unplugged from the outside world, aggressively ignoring the endless barrage of frantic voicemails left by various extended family members who had heard initial rumors of the spectacular arrest. By Monday morning, however, the wild rumors transformed into harsh, undeniable nationally televised facts. I sat alone at my quiet kitchen island, sipping a hot cup of black coffee, and turned on the local morning news broadcast. I did not even have to wait for the business segment. Jamal's total absolute downfall was the leading headline. The television screen displayed high-definition helicopter footage hovering directly over Jamal's sprawling luxury auto dealership. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers swarmed the commercial lot, like a highly coordinated, heavily armed army. They were wheeling out massive cardboard evidence boxes overflowing with physical financial records, encrypted hard drives, and falsified insurance claims. Bright yellow police tape completely wrapped the entire perimeter of the shiny glass showroom. The news anchor reported that a joint federal task force had successfully uncovered a massive, complex, multi-million-dollar commercial insurance fraud ring operating under the guise of a legitimate luxury auto business. They detailed the carefully staged accidents, the grossly inflated auto repair bills, and the unregistered Ponzi-style investment scheme he had attempted to launch at the Plaza Hotel. Seeing his fraudulent empire systematically dismantled on live television brought a very deep, profound sense of professional satisfaction to my analytical mind. The broadcast then cut to live footage outside the downtown federal courthouse. Jamal was being escorted out of a heavily armored transport van wearing a bright orange county jumpsuit instead of his custom velvet tuxedo. He looked completely and utterly defeated, his massive frame hunched over as he shuffled awkwardly past the shouting crowd of aggressive reporters. The legal correspondent broke the breaking news that Jamal had just faced his initial arraignment hearing. Because he possessed significant liquid assets hidden in offshore accounts, and due to the sheer magnitude of the federal wire fraud charges, the strict presiding judge officially deemed him an extreme flight risk. Jamal was categorically denied any bail. There would be absolutely no temporary release. There would be no returning to his fake luxury lifestyle. He was remanded directly into federal custody to await a lengthy, highly publicized criminal trial. His fake high society life was permanently extinguished. While Jamal was trading his counterfeit Rolex for a pair of cold, heavy steel handcuffs, my parents were facing their own truly terrifying, catastrophic reckoning. My corporate client, the aggressive real estate conglomerate, did not waste a single precious second. Early on Tuesday morning, a ruthless team of corporate lawyers, accompanied by the county sheriff, arrived at the sprawling brick colonial house I grew up in. Because the debt portfolio had been legally purchased and the notice of default had fully expired, the formal eviction process was swift and entirely merciless. Richard and Susan were given exactly 2 hours to hurriedly pack a few suitcases of personal belongings before the sheriff officially escorted them off the property. The heavy brass locks were immediately changed, and a massive heavy metal chain was tightly wrapped around the front gate. My parents had spent decades prioritizing their public image over their own daughter, and now they were standing on a cold public sidewalk with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. I was quietly reviewing a client portfolio on Wednesday afternoon when my personal cell phone buzzed on my desk. The screen displayed an unknown, unlisted local number. I assumed it was a delivery driver and casually answered the call. I was immediately met with the sound of heavy, pathetic sobbing. It was my pathetic father, Richard. He was calling me from a cheap prepaid burner phone because his primary cellular plan had been shut off for non-payment. His voice trembled with a desperate, broken energy I had never heard before. He told me that he and Susan were currently sitting in a cheap motel room that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. Then he did exactly what toxic enablers always do when cornered. He turned on his own golden child. Richard wept into the phone, admitting that Brittany was always a manipulative, pathological liar and a massive financial drain. He claimed he finally saw the truth about her destructive behavior and desperately begged me to let him and my mother move directly into my basement. I sat at my desk and listened to the sound of my father crying through the cheap speaker of his prepaid phone. Richard had spent my entire life standing tall, puffing out his chest, and dictating the strict rules of our household with absolute authority. Now his voice was reduced to a pathetic, wavering whine. He genuinely thought that by throwing my sister Brittany under the bus, he could magically unlock the door to my house and my bank accounts. He spent 5 minutes rambling about how he had been blind to her manipulation, claiming she had manipulated him and Susan into signing over the deed to their home. He painted himself as an innocent victim of a scheming daughter. He begged me to show some compassion, crying that they were sleeping on terrible mattresses and eating food out of vending machines. He promised that if I just let them move into my basement, things would finally be different, and we could be a real family. I let him talk until his voice grew hoarse and he completely ran out of breath. The silence stretched over the cellular line, heavy and expectant, as he waited for me to fold and offer a lifeline. I did not yell. I kept my voice entirely flat, delivering the cold, hard facts, exactly as a forensic accountant delivers a final audit report. I told him to stop lying to himself and to stop lying to me. I stated clearly that Brittany did not manipulate him into doing anything he did not already want to do. I reminded him that he and Susan actively chose to fund Jamal and Brittany because they were utterly obsessed with the fake image of high society success. They loved bragging to their country club friends about their wealthy son-in-law and their beautiful socialite daughter. I told Richard that he enabled their toxic behavior every single day of my life, willingly sacrificing my emotional well-being just to keep his golden child happy. I explained that accountability is not something you only embrace when you are suddenly sitting in a cheap motel room with no money left in your checking account. True accountability means accepting the consequences of your own deliberate actions. They gambled their entire generational wealth on a criminal because they thought they were smarter than everyone else. They lost. That was not a tragedy. That was just basic math, and I was done balancing their broken ledgers. Richard tried to interrupt, stammering out another desperate apology, but I cut him off immediately. I asked him if he remembered the piece of mail I sent them just a few weeks ago. I reminded him of the thick envelope containing a single $1 bill and a sticky note that said congratulations. I told him that the single dollar was not a joke. It was my final official severance package to a family that had emotionally bankrupted me for 34 years. I told him that $1 was the exact monetary value of the respect, love, and obligation I had left for him and Susan. I stated that I was not a rescue boat for sinking rats. I told him to never contact me again, wished him good luck with his new reality, and ended the call. I did not just block his burner number. I immediately logged into my cellular provider portal and permanently changed my personal phone number. I wiped my digital footprint clean, ensuring they could never reach me or my daughter Lily ever again. The severing was absolute and irreversible. With my number permanently changed, the final doors of my life slammed firmly shut, leaving my family entirely trapped in the devastating wreckage of their own making. Without my corporate salary to bail them out, the immediate reality of their situation hit them with brutal force. Brittany quickly realized that standing by her husband meant she would likely be implicated in his massive federal wire fraud and insurance scams. To desperately save herself from a devastating federal prison sentence, she immediately filed for a highly publicized, messy divorce, loudly claiming she had no idea Jamal was running a criminal syndicate. But filing for divorce did not save her lifestyle. All of her joint bank accounts were immediately federally frozen, and her luxury-leased vehicles were quickly repossessed by angry creditors. Stripped of her fake wealth and social status, the former golden child had absolutely nowhere else to go. She was forced to pack her designer bags and garbage sacks and move herself and her spoiled 15-year-old daughter, Sydney, directly into the only place they could afford. It was a cramped, two-bedroom, roach-infested rental apartment located in the worst part of the city, right alongside her completely bankrupt, broken parents. While my former family was busy learning how to navigate the harsh realities of public transportation and pest control, I walked into my corporate office on Thursday morning feeling lighter than I had in decades. The atmosphere at my accounting firm had completely shifted from the tense panic of the previous week. The viral GoFundMe video that had threatened my career was now entirely deleted, replaced by front-page news articles detailing Jamal's massive federal indictment. As I poured my morning coffee, the senior managing partner's assistant approached me with a wide smile, requesting my presence in the corner office. I walked down the carpeted hallway and stepped through the heavy mahogany doors. The senior partner was not sitting formally behind his desk this time. He was standing near the large window holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, looking incredibly pleased. He turned to face me and firmly shook my hand. He told me that my handling of the public relations nightmare was nothing short of brilliant. But more importantly, he wanted to discuss the off-market acquisition I had brought to our wealthiest corporate client. The real estate conglomerate had successfully closed the aggressive buyout of Jamal's foreclosed commercial lot and my parents' residential property. Because I had exclusively orchestrated the highly lucrative tip, our firm had secured a massive consulting fee from the conglomerate. The senior partner walked over to his desk, picked up a sleek white envelope, and handed it directly to me. He stated that the firm believed in aggressively rewarding employees who brought in top-tier business. I opened the envelope and stared at the certified corporate check inside. It was a six-figure commission bonus, larger than my entire annual salary. It was the ultimate financial reward for utilizing my forensic skills to dismantle a fraudulent empire. I thanked the senior partner, placed the heavy check into my leather briefcase, and took an extended lunch break. I did not go shopping for a luxury handbag or a fake Rolex. I drove straight to the offices of an elite independent wealth management attorney. I sat down in a quiet, modern conference room and placed the massive commission check on the glass table. I instructed the attorney to immediately draft the paperwork for an irrevocable trust fund entirely in the name of my 10-year-old daughter Lily. I was meticulous with the legal stipulations. I ensured the trust was wrapped in ironclad corporate protections. I explicitly wrote into the legal charter that under absolutely no circumstances could Richard, Susan, Brittany, or Jamal ever gain access to a single penny of the funds, even in the highly unlikely event of my untimely death. The money was locked away, designed to independently fund Lily's future college education, her first home, and her secure adulthood. I signed the final trust documents with my silver fountain pen, securing my daughter's financial future permanently. With the trust fund officially established, I drove back to my suburban neighborhood. I pulled into the driveway and looked at the beautiful house I had worked so hard to buy. It had been my safe sanctuary for years, but the recent memories of Jamal spitting on this very driveway and Brittany leaving a threatening note on my daughter's ruined bicycle had fundamentally tainted the space. I walked through the front door, greeted by the sight of dozens of sturdy cardboard moving boxes stacked neatly in the living room. Lily was sitting on the living room rug, happily wrapping her favorite books in protective bubble wrap. I had not just been busy auditing Jamal's fraudulent business over the past month. I had also quietly contacted a top private real estate broker. Knowing my family would eventually try to physically harass me once they ran out of money, I had listed my property on an exclusive off-market network. A wealthy tech executive relocating from the coast had purchased my house entirely in cash, paying significantly over the original asking price. The closing documents were already signed, and the final wire transfer had cleared my bank account that very morning. I knelt on the rug next to Lily and helped her tape up a heavy box of toys. She looked up at me with a bright, excited smile, asking if our new house would have a bigger backyard. I smiled back and promised her it would have the biggest yard she had ever seen. We were not just moving to a different neighborhood. We were moving entirely out of the state, relocating to a vibrant, beautiful city located hundreds of miles away. I had already accepted a highly lucrative senior director position at a prestigious national accounting firm in our new city. We were both leaving immediately, and I was leaving absolutely zero forwarding address behind. The heavy wooden door of my empty house clicked shut for the final time. I did not look back. I handed the keys to the real estate agent waiting on the porch, took Lily by the hand, and climbed into the waiting black SUV. As the driver navigated the familiar streets toward the highway, I watched the neighborhood where I had spent my entire life fade away in the tinted rearview window. There were no tears or lingering sense of regret. There was only a powerful momentum propelling me forward. My phone remained silent, secured with a new number that no one from my past would discover. I had successfully severed every single toxic anchor that had dragged me down for decades. The drive to the airport was smooth and peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaotic frenzy of my former family's current reality. We pulled up to the international terminal of John F. Kennedy Airport, the gateway to our new life. A concierge greeted us immediately at the curb, taking our luggage and escorting us swiftly through the private security checkpoint. Within 15 minutes, Lily and I were walking through the frosted glass doors of the exclusive first-class departure lounge. The atmosphere inside was a masterclass in quiet, refined luxury. Soft ambient lighting illuminated plush velvet armchairs, and the faint sound of classical piano played overhead. It was the exact type of legitimate high society environment my mother and sister had spent their entire lives pretending to belong to. But they were currently learning how to navigate the public housing system while I was simply waiting for a boarding call. I guided Lily to a cozy seating area situated right next to the massive windows overlooking the active tarmac. A sharply dressed attendant appeared within seconds, placing a steaming mug of rich hot chocolate, topped with fresh whipped cream, directly in front of my daughter. Lily wrapped her small hands around the warm ceramic mug, her eyes wide with absolute wonder and pure joy. I sat across from her with a glass of crisp champagne, watching the bright smile radiate across her face. This was her actual 10th birthday present. We were not flying directly to our new city just yet. I had booked us 2 first-class tickets on a direct overnight flight to Paris. We were going to spend 2 entire weeks exploring the Louvre, eating fresh pastries in Montmartre, and watching the Eiffel Tower sparkle against the night sky. It was a spectacular belated birthday celebration designed to completely erase the painful memory of sitting alone at that empty garden table. There were no mandatory $5,000 entry fees required here. There were no fake relatives demanding attention or criminals looking for a financial bailout. There was only the two of us finally prioritizing our own happiness. I took a slow sip of my champagne, feeling a profound sense of peace settle into my bones. I was not bracing myself for the next familial disaster or calculating how to protect my assets from my own flesh and blood. My mind briefly drifted to the people I had left behind. By now, Richard and Susan were fully experiencing the brutal reality of their choices. They were likely sitting in that cramped, roach-infested apartment, blaming everyone but themselves. Brittany was navigating the terrifying federal court system, desperately trying to untangle her name from Jamal's massive financial crimes. Jamal was sitting in a cold holding cell facing decades in federal prison without a single shred of his former arrogance left. They spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable resource, a silent bank account meant to fund their delusions of grandeur. They thought they could casually discard my daughter and then demand my obedience. But they severely underestimated the precision of an accountant who had finally run out of patience. I had audited their lies, liquidated their fake empire, and left them completely bankrupt. I turned from the past and looked out the massive glass window. The afternoon sun was setting over the sprawling airport, casting a beautiful golden hue across the busy tarmac. A commercial jet slowly taxied onto the main runway, its massive engines roaring to life with incredible power. I watched the plane accelerate down the long strip of asphalt, lifting gracefully into the open sky. Lily pointed excitedly at the soaring aircraft. I smiled, resting my hand gently over hers. I realized in that quiet moment you cannot truly ascend if you are constantly carrying the crushing burden of toxic people. I looked back out at the endless horizon, reflecting on the absolute truth of my new reality. I finally understood that sometimes ruthlessly cutting off the dead weight is the only way you can ever truly learn how to fly. As the commercial jet broke through the thick layer of clouds and leveled out at 30,000 feet, I looked down at the shrinking coastline of the United States. The physical distance was finally matching the emotional distance I had cultivated over the past month. Sitting in that quiet first-class cabin, watching my daughter sleep peacefully under a warm blanket, I realized that my story is not just a tale of family drama. It is a harsh objective lesson in the reality of financial independence and the absolute necessity of setting ironclad boundaries. For too long, society has conditioned women to be the emotional shock absorbers and the silent financial safety nets for their broken families. We are taught to sacrifice our own stability to maintain the fragile illusion of peace. We are expected to simply write the checks, silently endure the insults, and smile nicely at the holiday dinners, while our enabling parents funnel all our hard-earned resources directly to the golden child I spent 34 years playing that exact role, desperately hoping that my financial contributions would eventually earn me the basic parental love that my sister received simply for existing. But financial independence is not merely about having a large balance in your checking account or wearing a custom-tailored power suit. True financial independence is the ultimate defensive shield. It is the undeniable power to look at toxic people, even if they share your DNA, and definitively say no. When you control your own assets, you control your own destiny. You no longer have to tolerate blatant disrespect just to keep a roof over your head or maintain a place at the Thanksgiving table. My parents believed that my wealth was their emergency fund. They viewed my career as a convenient backup plan for Jamal's fraudulent failures. They completely forgot that the very skills I used to build my wealth were the exact same skills I could use to dismantle their lies. As a forensic accountant, I deal entirely in objective facts, bank statements, and legal liabilities. I learned the hard way that you cannot reason with toxic enablers using logic or emotional appeals. You can only stop them by cutting off their funding and exposing them to the blinding light of the law. This brings me to a crucial reality about the legal system in America. Many people are terrified of the law. They view courtroom subpoenas and lawyers as things to be avoided at all costs. But when you are dealing with manipulative family members who refuse to respect your boundaries, the legal system becomes your most powerful ally. The law does not care about your mother's fake tears, and the law does not care about your sister's manipulative social media videos. The law only cares about documented evidence and absolute truth. I did not scream at Jamal when he threatened my daughter. I filed a permanent restraining order. I did not argue with Brittany online. I served her fraudulent GoFundMe campaign with a federal subpoena. I did not negotiate with my father when he tried to extort me. I orchestrated the legal buyout of his foreclosed property and established an irrevocable trust fund for my child. You must learn to weaponize the legal system to protect your peace. Use contracts, secure your deeds, lock down your credit, and never hesitate to involve the authorities when a family member crosses a criminal line. To every single woman listening to this specific story who is currently trapped in the truly exhausting role of the family scapegoat, hear me very clearly. Your toxic enabling parents will never suddenly wake up and finally realize your true worth. They will gladly let you drown entirely if it means keeping their favored child afloat. You must stop waiting for an apology that is never going to come. You must legally and financially protect your assets from the people who claim to love you, but only value what you provide. Build your own wealth. Secure it behind bulletproof legal trusts, and do not let anyone shame you for prioritizing your own future over their manufactured crises. You owe your parents nothing when their love is strictly conditional and transactional. Your only real obligation in this world is to yourself and the children you raise. The family I was born into tried to use my success as a stepping stone for their own greed. They arrogantly thought they could discard my innocent daughter on her 10th birthday and then casually demand a massive financial ransom for their incredibly fake socialite lifestyle. They wanted $5,000 for a lie, so I gave them a lifetime of truth. Have you ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your own blood? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more.